a question's been going through my head. What is it that makes Australians Australians? You know, there's a lot of immigrants that have come here that have been grandfathered in, but there's a lot of recent immigrants in the last, say, 10, 15 years. They haven't been grandfathered in. They haven't tried to learn the language, and whether that's in the UK or Australia or the UK. What is it that makes us us? And I've just been trying to wrap my head around that question like, what are their values? It's, you know, it's clearly not a religion thing, because we come from all sorts of religions, but there's a solidarity of Aussie values. What are those values? Topher talks about this. Topher Field talks about this all the time. But
well, actually, I had a interesting thing just this weekend. The rugby was on. I think maybe I mentioned it to you, and it was quite interesting because South Africa. I love the Springboks, and they played. And at the beginning of the game, these three big African guys come on, these warriors with these spears, and they come running into the thing, and it's just such a sight to see. And then anyway, the game starts, and the national anthem starts, and you just see, you know, they call it the Rainbow Nation, and you see all these people, black, white, colours from and they're all just singing as one under one flag. And then the contrast to that was the Australia game, and there's the, you know, welcome to country, make you feel bad about who you are, and, you know, what I call it's like the guilt trip thing. And then and it's just this, to me, there's this, you know, we've got two flags, it's divisive. So, you know, the question is, what are you actually standing for? And when I look at South Africa, I mean, it's, you know, it's a first world country, but they have actually come together. They've actually, that is an example of, in my view, what we should be. We should all be connected together and not be divided. And we are a divided nation. And so until you can identify, and when you look at it, I mean, that's just rugby, but the whole country is behind that one. And sport is a great way to unify people. But they are all, I mean, and they got problems in their country, but they're actually united as a, you can feel it, you can see it.
I think one of the things is Australians, I mean, historically, once upon a time, we were quite united. We were united around a sense of pride of being part of the British Empire. And so we were kind of united around something that wasn't necessarily sort of indigenous to us. It was about Britain. Now, with the decline of Britain after World War II, and then sort of the influx of non-British immigration after World War II, one of the things that really bound us together starts to become increasingly irrelevant. And so what replaces it? And there's a sense in which nothing's really replaced it. And the one thing that kind of brings us together every year, although I actually see that fading now, is Anzac. So if there's a kind of Aussie value or Aussie religion anymore, I would say it's Anzac. But I don't think that's actually going to last over the next 2 decades unless there's a really strong concerted effort by governments like what John Howard did in the 90s to just keep it very, very strong. I think if you were to ask me what really defines Australians, I would say apathy. The things that Australians tend to be passionate about, other than sports, I can think of 1 or 2 things. So strong borders. Both political parties have learned that Australians will not tolerate weak borders. We're just fanatical about being in control of our borders, and that's because we don't have a European history where we've never been in control of our borders. We can control it. And if there's something else, I think The Voice showed that Australians in general want a kind of united, non-fractured country. So there's a sense in which if there's anything that we're quite strong about, it tends to be negatives, or, you know, keeping people out, and no sort of basically get rid of the identity politics. But other than that, we're basically apathetic.
Well, I think that brings up 2 good points, actually. One, I think one of the things that kind of defined us was an attitude. It's a, you know, she'll be right, mate. And, you know, that laid-back attitude, don't stress, just it'll sort itself out. The problem is it doesn't always sort itself out. And I think that really was highlighted over the last couple of years. And the second point it kind of brings up is that divisive attitude. Even though The Voice showed us that we didn't want to divide us, it really did divide the country. And there's a lot of things that have been happening recently that are dividing people, but are on so many different lines. So it's actually not just two groups. It's getting splintered into smaller and smaller groups, whether it's The Voice, Ukraine and Russia, Palestine and Israel, gender ideology. There's just so many things, and we're getting splintered into smaller and smaller groups. And as we all know, united we stand, divided we fall. And the more we become splintered on these different topics, and a lot of them, let's be real, aren't relevant to what's happening to us here, but they're making it so important that we're forgetting what the important things are. It's making things very difficult for us to get together and face what we really should be facing right now.
Yeah.
If you think about the, like you were right, John Howard in the 90s, I remember reading a book about him, and around mateship, he really created that energy around mates and being mate and mateship. And that was a big part of the Australian identity. And just this last Australia Day, just, the area I went down to the beach there. I was the only person on the beach that actually had an Australian flag. There was not a single, and I remember, 5 years, 8 years ago, that beach, 10 years, used to be full of Australian flags. So if you are not connected, if you don't have, it's like a missing identity. If you don't have an identity, if the flag is symbol, seen as a symbol that is shameful, then how can you unite under a flag that?
How can you?
And you think about how many, and you think about how many countries like England, America, like how many have two flags?
Yeah. Like
we drive over the bridge every day, there's two flags there. It's like, it's visually, we are divided. Until we come together, it's always so I think that's what's kind of gone missing, is that the mateship's gone. Nobody's got any pride in the flag anymore. And there's an identity crisis.
And that's the downside of the apathetic culture. I mean, there is an upside. We don't have civil wars. But the downside is it means that really bad people can get into positions of immense power and completely change education systems, bring about treaties with indigenous peoples in states, so effectively declaring other nations within our nation, and a whole bunch of other things. And Australians just and pursue culturally suicidal immigration policies, and Australians just watch it happen, and it's like, gee, that's no good, is it? Gosh.
She'll be right.
Yeah, someone should do something about that. And that's kind of the Australian attitude. We just watch things go pear-shaped and then kind of scratch our heads and say, how did we get to this?
Yeah. I feel like I'm in the business of working out why people like Adam didn't just do that. And they were like, no, I'm going to come up with a solution.
Well, because I think part of it is very historical. Australia begins as a penal colony. So it's in our DNA that we are used to government making decisions on our behalf, even without our consent. After the penal colony, and convicts are also given land, they're given it by government. So again, used to government giving things to us. And the other thing is, Australia's such a massive landmass. For the most part, markets and voluntary giving were not able to build things in Australia that could be built in England and built in America, like railroads, telecommunications technology, churches even. All of these things were basically funded by colonial governments because the land was so big, the population so small and so sparse that there was just no market for it. And so it's just in Australia's DNA to say the government will do this. We are uniquely prone to look to government based on our history, our geography, and our tiny population. It's just kind of part of who we are, but it's starting to really destroy our country now.
I think the Tucker Carlson, he came over last week, or whatever it was, a week ago. And that was a bit of a wake-up call, because he's basically like sounding an alarm. He says, listen, you've got a beautiful country here. And we do. We have an amazing country. And I mean, that's why I came here. I think it's the last best place in the world.
Oh, wow.
But, all the other countries, England, the US, whatever, they're getting this mass migration it's just like wiping them out. Not in the sense that, but it's having a massive effect. And because of where we are and because of our borders and stuff, he's like, don't end up like us. And we, you know, and the worry is that Australians, as you mentioned, is just like, I should be right. And like, you don't realize how good you've got it until you don't have it anymore.
Yep.
And that's why all those people, that download that, all the people that have come from all around the world, is because they've seen what it looks like in the end. And they don't want, you know, that's why they came here.
Yeah.
And I think too many Australians haven't seen that, the end game. And by the time it's, you know, like you boil a, you know, thing in water where eventually by the time you wake up, you're like, oh my God, like, no, everything is buggered. And it's like, well, that's it. You had your chance and you missed it.
What's the nickname for Australia?
Lucky country.
That's right. And what happens to luck?
Runs out.
Always runs out.
Yeah, those are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it.
That's right.
Who said that?
George Santayana. George Santayana.
Very good, very good. Before we continue, if you guys, I've been monitoring the comments. If you can just make sure these mics work best when it's just under a fist away from your mouth. Don't be shy to move it around and whatever. Going into it after that phenomenal detour, because I actually really enjoyed that, because I think we heard a bit of your different understandings of where Australia's at. That question has been bugging me about how they've been dividing us and what it is that actually unites us as a country, because it's a very unusual. Every country has a unique history, but Australia has a very unusual way it's come about and unique way. But one of the ways they are trying to tear us apart, Elvis, you mentioned the point about, you know, Israel, Hamas, one of many things, whether it's men and women or this or that, Israel, Hamas, Jews and Muslims, one of the things that I believe they're stoking the flames are, is Anthony Albanese has brought